I'm Betsy Carpenter, Associate Curator at the Walker Art Center and co-curator of the Frida Kahlo exhibition. I'm so pleased that so many of you could be here with us today and to celebrate the opening weekend of this exhibition's debut here at the Walker Art Center. Without question, this exhibition would not have been possible without the contributions of my co-curator, the art historian and world-renowned biographer Hayden Herrera. I'm indebted to Hayden, first for her groundbreaking research that spanned more than 20 years, and for her tremendous commitment to this project. Hayden Herrera has taught art history at the School of Visual Arts in New York and Latin American art at New York University. She is an author of numerous articles and reviews for such publications as Art in America, Art News, Art Forum, Connoisseur, and the New York Times, among others. An essay on the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo was published first in Art Forum in 1976, which prompted Harper & Row to commission Herrera to write a book on Kahlo. Frida, a biography of Frida Kahlo, was published in 1983. Since then, it's been translated into 13 languages. Her other books include Mary Frank from 1990, Frida Kahlo, The Paintings, 1991, and Matisse, A Portrait, 1993. She's also curated a number of exhibitions, among them a landmark Frida Kahlo exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago in 1978, a Joan Snyder exhibition, and a Mary Frank sculpture, drawing, and prints exhibition. Both were held in 1978 at the Neuberger Museum at the State University of New York at Purchase. In 1996, Herrera was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship for her work on her latest book, Arshil Gorky, His Life and Work, 2003, which was a 2004 Pulitzer Prize finalist. She's currently writing a biography on the sculptor Isma Noguchi. Directly following Hayden's lecture, she'd be happy to take questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and an usher will bring you a microphone. Now please join me in welcoming Hayden Herrera.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm Betsy Carpenter. It was the best co-curator in the world. So thank you, Betsy. I'm going to plunge right in because it's really a double lecture. I'm going to talk about Frida Kahlo, and then I'm going to talk about her legacy, which I wrote about in the catalog. Partly it's important to talk about her legacy because, as Kathy Hallbrush has pointed out, Frida Kahlo is still, in a way, a contemporary artist and has had a profound effect on younger artists. So that'll be sort of a tag on to the end of the Frida lectures. I'm going to plunge right in with the first slide, which is The Broken Column, 1944. Beginning in 1926, when she painted her first self-portrait at the age of 19 and ending with her death in 1954 at the age of 47, the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo produced some 66 self-portraits, maybe more will turn up, in oil, and plus about 80 paintings of other subjects, mostly still lives and portraits of friends. She painted herself so often in order to extend her being into the world, to know herself, and to make herself known, which she certainly succeeded. This dialogue with herself produced some of the most original and courageous imagery of the 20th century. So she painted herself, as you see, broken open here, and she painted herself, this is just running through some of her very original imagery, wearing Christ's crown of thorns. It's from 1940. Hemorrhaging during a miscarriage in Henry Ford Hospital, 1932. Anesthetized on a hospital trolley, Tree of Hope, 1946. Sleeping with a Skeleton, 1940. And even when she shows herself accompanied by her husband, the great muralist Diego Rivera, who you see in her forehead there, she's always thinking about Rivera, she looks fearfully alone. On the left is Fulang Chang and I, 1937. On the right is Self-Portrait with Small Monkey from 1945. The one on the right is in the show. The other is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Her self-portraits are extraordinary for the honesty with which she faced the changes in herself through suffering and age. In her direct and self-debunking manner, Frida Kahlo explained, quote, "I paint my own reality. The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to, and I paint whatever passes through my head without any other consideration." Kahlo pierced so deeply into the personal that her work becomes universal. And as a result, I think that each of us feels when looking at her self-portraits that she's speaking directly to us. Kahlo's small, oh, it's amazing to see them in these huge slides. Not slides, PowerPoint, sorry. Kahlo's small, meticulously painted self-portraits demand our attention by singling out the viewer as the one person that must share her feelings. Yet, though the portraits are often shockingly self-revealing, they do not offer a full confession. Gripped by the magnetism of these paintings, we come to realize that Frida Kahlo never lets down her mask of reserve. This withholding accounts, in part, I think, for the strange energy that emanates from her self-portraits, and you'll really feel that when you walk through the show. That's very different from looking at reproductions in books. It was this energy that prompted the surrealist poet and essayist André Breton to call Frida Kahlo's art a ribbon around a bomb. The energy comes also from Kahlo's intense need to confront her reality and to communicate her pain. It was as if by putting that pain out onto the painting that she was working on her easel, she could separate herself or exorcise the pain. "I paint self-portraits," Kahlo once said, "because I'm so often alone, because I'm the person I know best." She had time to know herself. In 1925, the bus that she was riding home from school was crushed by a trolley, and Kahlo, oh dear, I shouldn't have touched the computer. Okay, back to here. The bus she was riding home from school was crushed by a trolley. She nearly died in the accident. Took a long time for her. She was in the hospital a long time. And it left her a partial cripple for life. And it was while recuperating that she began to paint. This is her first self-portrait, and we're incredibly happy to have it in the show. It is marvelous. It's from 1926, a year after the accident. Her self-portrait from 26 reveals that from the beginning, painting the image she saw in the mirror was both a self-exploration and a way of attaching people to her, of holding on to people's love. It was a gift for her first boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, who had gone to the National Preparatory School with her, and she gave it to him at a moment that he was pulling away from her. And when she sent it to him, she wrote a note saying, quote, "I implore you to hang it in a low place where you can see it as if you were looking at me." Feeling isolated by illness, Frida Kahlo painted substitute Fridas that could withstand life's blows and would confirm her fragile hold on life. The first half of the 1930s, the Riveras were mostly in the United States, where Rivera had various mural commissions. They were in Detroit in 1932, where Frida had a miscarriage. And to alleviate her depression after the miscarriage, Kahlo began the project of painting every year of her life. And she began at the beginning with My Birth, that you see here, which expressed her grief over having had the miscarriage. She was born in Coyoacan, then a southern suburb of Mexico City, now greater part of Mexico City. She was born in 1907. Her father was a German-born immigrant to Mexico who became a photographer in Mexico and was very successful during the Porfirian period. Her mother was a Mexican of mixed Indian and Spanish descent. My Birth, Kahlo said, shows how I imagined I was born, and it is a peculiar nativity in that everyone in it is dead. She explained, "My head is covered because coincidentally with the painting of my birth, my mother died." So she went to Mexico and then she came back, and I think that must have been when she covered the head of the woman giving birth with the sheet. So it's complicated. The dead mother is thus Frida and also her mother. And the baby is both Frida and the miscarried child. It's interesting that she said, "My head is covered," when it's supposed to be her birth. So it's clearly the dead woman is both Frida and her mother. After the 1932 miscarriage, Kahlo began to make paintings that resemble retablos, ex votos. These are small paintings on tin that you see in churches in Mexico. Kahlo and Rivera had a huge collection that's in the Frida Kahlo Museum. They're votive paintings with an inscription at the bottom that tells you what's happening. There's always a holy figure of some kind saving a protagonist from illness or an accident. This is actually a retablo. They're usually about the size of a lawyer's pad. So this one is very, very large, in this, looking very, very large. Like a retablo, I'm going to go back to my birth. My birth was painted on a small sheet of tin, but she did not fit, and there's a scroll, there's a scroll at the bottom, but Kahlo did not fill it in, I think because this painting actually depicts a double death. From retablos, Kahlo borrowed the small scale and also a kind of primitivizing, sort of folkloric style that helps very much to mitigate the force of this rather difficult subject matter. It's distancing, having it be painted in a slightly primitive way, and thank goodness it's a small painting. Going on with the story of her life, she painted My Nurse and I in 1937. Which she said was one of her favorite of her own paintings. It shows her in the arms of her Indian wet nurse, but even as this painting declares her passion for her native roots, her Indian roots, it is also an expression of her sense of disconnection, because the nurse's embrace is hardly cozy. It's an extremely unloving embrace, and seems as though she's actually offering Frida as a sacrificial victim. Kahlo said that she painted her head as an adult because it was the adult that did the remembering, but she didn't remember her nurse's face, so she gave her a Teotihuacan mask. About this painting, she said, "I came out looking like such a little girl, and she, the nurse, so strong and saturated with providence that it made me long to sleep." So she clearly found it a comforting image. But I think it seems really more like an embodiment of the kind of cruel fatalism. The nurse is hardly protective. And what Kahlo has done here is to take the traditional Madonna Caritas image of the Virgin suckling Christ and turn it into something that expresses her own feeling of loss and disconnection. So it's a feeling that I think started early in life. She said, "My mother couldn't suckle me because 11 months after I was born, my sister Christina was born. I was fed by a nana whose breasts they washed every time I was going to suckle." The next painting in this autobiographical series is on top, My Grandparents, My Parents, and I, from 1936. And I'm just showing it with the patio of the Blue House in Coyoacán, below the photograph of it, where Frida Kahlo was born and where she died. And this is now the wonderful Frida Kahlo Museum in Coyoacán. Some of you have visited. This is, the grandparents' painting, is Kahlo is holding, she's about 2 years old. She's in the patio of the Blue House, and she's holding her whole family tree with this marvelous red ribbon. It's really a very sly triple self-portrait with Frida, and then Frida as a fetus, and then just below that is Frida's conception. Frida Kahlo, on the right is Don Guillermo Kahlo on the left is Don Guillermo Kahlo from 1951, And this is a photograph that he took of himself, probably around I think it's from 1932, that is in the Vicente Woolf collection, which some of you have already seen on the walls. It's part of our exhibition. It's a great collection of photographs that belong to Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. Frida Kahlo identified much more with her father than with her mother, and he said of Frida, she had 3 whole sisters and 2 half-sisters. He said, "Frida is the most intelligent of my daughters. She is the most like me." He was a very eccentric and highly intellectual man, and he taught Frida Kahlo photography. She helped him in his workshop, so that her first experience with paintbrushes were actually those small retouching brushes with which he improved the looks of people in his portrait photographs. I also think that the fact that Frida Kahlo became so familiar with portrait photography has something to do with the kind of stillness in her self-portraits, the way she always looks very much as if she's posing and somewhat rigid, as though she's getting ready to have her photograph taken. Her father, Frida Kahlo, had polio at the age of 6 or 7 and was isolated for a long time. And she was left with one withered, her right leg was withered, which made her completely miserable. She was humiliated by that, and she wore several pairs of socks to hide the thinness of her leg. And when she went out in the Plaza of Coyoacán, her friends would tease her, saying, "Frida Kahlo pata de palo," which means Frida Kahlo peg leg. Her father was the one that kind of helped her through her rehabilitation. And her illness made a tremendous bond with her father, who was also an ill man. He was an epileptic, and Frida Kahlo would have to accompany him on photography outings to make sure that his cameras didn't get stolen. Of her father, she said, "My childhood was marvelous because although my father was a sick man, he had vertigos every month and a half. He was an immense example to me of tenderness, of work, photographer, and also painter." He was a sort of a Sunday painter. "And above all, of understanding for all my problems." On the left is 4 Inhabitants of Mexico from 1938. On the right, Girl with Death Mask, also from 1938. I'd say on the painting on the left, Kahlo is maybe 4 years old. She's moved out of the patio of her family home into the Plaza of Coyoacán. Again, it's a situation in which she's not protected. The Coyoacán Plaza is vast and empty, and if you look through Kahlo's exhibition, you'll see that she's often in these vast, empty spaces, which communicates a strong feeling of loneliness. The 4 inhabitants are a Judas figure. Those on the left, they're made of paper mache, and they're wired with fireworks, and they are blown up on the Sábado de Gloria, just before Easter, the Saturday. Then there's a Nayarit pregnant idol, and would be a very large version of those clay skeletons that children dangle on the Day of the Dead, and then a straw rider in the background. Anyway, the square's huge emptiness really is a feeling of estrangement. In most of Kahlo's self-portraits, she is immobilized, cut off from her surroundings, and alone. She is disconnected from everyone except the object of her gaze, which is both us, the viewer, and Kahlo herself, since looking into the mirror and then looking at her self-portraits in progress made Kahlo her own chief spectator. In 1922, Frida Kahlo entered the National Preparatory School, the best school in Mexico City. You see a photograph of her on the right, and it was there that the Mexican mural Renaissance began, and it was there that Diego Rivera painted his first mural in Mexico, and you see him on the scaffold on the left. It was really a center of ferment, that school, of political ferment. Kahlo was very much a tomboy, part of a group of boys called the Cachuchas, yet she was very attracted to Diego Rivera, or so the myth has it, and she made him the butt of her mischief, and soaped those steps that he had to climb, and so that he would fall, but he never fell. Rivera had a kind of elephantine grace. She said, She said to her friends, "My ambition in life is to have a child by Diego Rivera, and I'm going to tell him so someday." And her friends were, of course, shocked because they thought he was ugly and fat and a communist and perfectly awful. And then came in 1925 the terrible accident. This is a retablo that Kahlo must have found and then retouched and added a scroll of saying that her parents expressed thanks to the Virgin of Sorrows for having saved their daughter. So there's Frida's accident in a kind of redone ex voto. In the accident, her spine was broken in 3 places. Her right leg was broken, and a metal handrail pierced through her hip and came out through her vagina, apparently. She was in the hospital, and she wrote to Alejandro Gomez Arias, her boyfriend. She said, "In this hospital, death dances around my bed at night." And it certainly continued. You'll see many skeletons in her paintings, skulls and skeletons, and it certainly continued to dance around her bed. Kahlo, her life was really a battle against slow disintegration. She had something like 30 operations, surgeries. But the accident also made her an artist. She was, as she put it, bored as hell in bed, that's a quote, and she needed a way to help support her family. So I'm showing you again the first self-portrait from a year after the accident. Her first works, and on the right is a portrait of her sister, younger sister, Christina, from 2 years later. It's really the difference between night and day. The early painting is very much Frida in a European mode. She called it, when she sent it to Alejandro, she called it your Botticelli. She loved Italian Renaissance painting. She loved Bronzino and Memling and all of those sources, I think, and maybe even Art Nouveau, possibly Modigliani, are in there. The first works were portraits of family and friends. And in 1928, when she painted Christina, she was well enough to take her first works to the Ministry of Education, where Rivera was working on that marvelous mural sequence, and to show to him, and asked him whether it was worth her while to go on painting, and he certainly thought so. He admired the paintings, and he very much admired Frida Kahlo. A courtship began, and they married the following year in 1929. This is her. Now look carefully at her first self-portrait from 26, and this is her second self-portrait from 1929, 3 years later. There's a tremendous change that happens after she comes into contact with Rivera. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Betsy. Yeah, there it is again. Okay, tremendous change in her work. I think she was very much influenced by Rivera at this stage. But now, instead of this sort of Renaissance melancholy Botticelli princess in a velvet dress, she's now a contemporary Mexican girl in a cheap Mexican blouse you could buy in a market. She's wearing pre-Columbian jade beads. This shows she's a mestiza, and colonial-style earrings. What's happened here is that she now has espoused the ethic of Mexicanidad, something that she shared with Diego Rivera and with a whole generation of Mexican painters, musicians, writers, and intellectuals. It was the sort of revaluing of everything that was indigenous, especially popular art and pre-Columbian art. It was at this stage that Kahlo began, when she came into contact with Rivera, that she began to wear the Tijuana costumes and other costumes from other regions of Mexico, partly to show her affiliation with the Mexican people, partly to camouflage her pain, hide her limp, but also to please Rivera, who felt that Mexican women should wear Mexican clothes. This is another painting on the left from 1929 by Frida Kahlo, and on the right is, I'm just comparing it to a Rivera to show the powerful influence he had on her work in the year that they got married. That's Rivera's Girl with Coral Necklace from 1926. And like many other Mexican painters of this period, Rivera and Frida both were, they painted a lot of Mexican Indian children and Mexican Indian people. In 1929, they married, and here is their wedding photograph on the left, and she's smoking, as you can see. And on the right is a painting, a wedding painting portrait done 2 years later when they were in San Francisco, 1931. When they married, Frida's mother said that it was like the marriage between an elephant and a dove. Kahlo chronicled her marriage in paint, and this is the first one. I think it shows that from the beginning there were problems. Actually, Rivera began to have affairs, and so did Frida very soon after they were married. And also she, I think it shows you that she sort of defers to Diego. She cocks her head towards him. The body language is she's playing the role of the adoring wife. He's the big maestro holding the palette. And I think it suggests something of Rivera's unpossessibility. He was a major philanderer. But Kahlo put up with it, and as I said, fought back with affairs of her own. She said about her marriage, "Being the wife of Diego is the most marvelous thing in the world. I let him play matrimony with other women. Diego is not anybody's husband and never will be, but he is a great comrade." But for all her insistence that Rivera should be free, Kahlo has placed her and Rivera's hands in the center of the painting, and really the pivot of her life was the marriage bond. Very soon after they were married, Kahlo had a therapeutic abortion at 3 months, and she said, quote, "We could not have a child, and I cried inconsolably, but I distracted myself by cooking, dusting the house, sometimes by painting." She didn't have a very organized painting schedule. "And every day by going to accompany Diego on the scaffold. It gave him great pleasure when I arrived with the midday meal in a basket covered with flowers." As I said, the Riveras were in the United States in the first half of the 30s. In 1932, they were in Detroit, where he was working on the Detroit Institute of Art mural sequence. On July 4th, Frida Kahlo had a terrible miscarriage, and the painting on top is Henry Ford Hospital, done soon after the miscarriage. And in Detroit, the pain of miscarriage made Frida Kahlo focus her art on her most personal experience. She began to paint, at this point, mostly self-portraits. And it was in Detroit that she really formed, I think, her distinctive style based on ex-votos and also on Mexican popular art. And I'm just showing you down below, it's a bad photograph. It's a little object that I picked up in a market of Guadalajara. I picked up about 6 of them. Each one had some different severed part of the human body. And it's photograph cut off the base, but it says Ultima Lucha. So there's a certain humor to this little 3-inch high popular art object. But I think that kind of object has much to do with Frida's, both her sense of humor and her painful imagery. The Henry Ford Hospital is very much like an ex-voto. It's like a retablo with these 6 symbols of her miscarriage floating around her bed at the end of red ribbons that are like umbilical cords, replacing, in this case, what would be a holy image floating in the sky. And here again, she's incredibly alone, and a vast empty space, and in the far distance is the Ford Rouge plant where Rivera had made the studies for his, many studies of machines for his Detroit Institute of Arts mural. So you have a sense of enormous distance that she felt from Rivera when she was in the hospital in Detroit. And I think it's interesting that in Kahlo's painting of herself nude, she's nothing, she's not the object of a male gaze, but rather it's a depiction of herself as she felt herself to be, really from inside of her, how she was. It's not a very flattering image. In fact, Kahlo never flattered herself. If you look at the photographs in the Wolf collection, you'll see that she's much prettier in reality than she was in her paintings. This is self-portrait on the borderline that is in the show. I think it's Frida Kahlo was very homesick for Mexico. She wasn't very happy in Detroit. And basically the flag that she's holding is turning. I think it's probably full of irony, this painting, but the flag is held towards Mexico. But Mexico doesn't look so great, and the United States looks terrible. Mexico is old, ancient, pre-Columbian temple and various pre-Columbian idols down below, but everything is kind of crumbling. But it does have these marvelous succulent plants at the bottom. But the United States, the Ford Motor Company is belching smoke, And then what we have is machines. And Frida Kahlo was not that fond of machines. The loss of her child and the realizing that she probably never was going to have a child, the theme of childlessness is very central to many of Frida Kahlo's paintings. I think it comes out in this one, Me and My Doll from 1937. Kahlo said, "Painting completed my life. I lost 3 children. Painting substituted for all of this. I believe work is the best thing." She's smoking, as she does in several of her, I think 3 in this show, of her self-portraits. It's a very odd sort of mother-child image, and the child isn't even a child, it's an ugly doll. There's no connection between the so-called mother and child. And I've always felt it was very sardonic painting. Kahlo made many paintings of herself with her pet spider monkeys. This is one of them from 1940. And this is another one in the Gelman collection from 1943. She had numerous pets, parrots, monkeys, cats, and esquinkle dogs. The pets that she paints herself with never seem to, even though they're maybe like substitute children, they never seem to really alleviate her loneliness. Roots from 1943, a marvelous painting, is kind of the expression of a childless woman whose body opens up and gives birth to a vine through which her own blood courses, coming out of those leaves to feed the Mexican earth. Childlessness led, I think, to an obsession with the theme of fertility, and it also reinforced Kahlo's view of the interconnectedness of all of life. This was a powerful faith that she had. And she painted a number of hybrids, part plant, part human being. And she also once painted herself, you'll see it later, half deer. In this case, she's turned the flowers in Flower of Life on the left, 44, into a male and female sexual organs. And in Sun in Life on the right from 1942, you can see that these plants are enclosing a fetus that is weeping and various male and female sexual organs again. I've always thought that the sun was a sort of abstracted and face of Diego Rivera, a sort of mixing Diego Rivera with a pre-Columbian idol. I'm not sure, but it's just a supposition, because the only other person that gets the eye of supervisibility in Frida Kahlo's work is Moses, and then Diego Rivera. So I've always assumed that maybe that was partly him. The Riveras were in New York in 1933, where Rivera was painting his Rockefeller Center mural. Kahlo, meanwhile, painted her own political protest in My Dress Hangs There. It's a very small painting. The bottom part is collage, and it's it's a sort of sardonic view of New York during the Depression years. Kahlo was horrified that the rich people were sipping cocktails and having cocktail parties while the poor were standing in bread lines. You see, the bottom is newspapers, collage, pieces from newspaper collaged, and there is a bread line. There are various details of political manifestations. There's a baseball game on the right. Kahlo felt a very strong sympathy for the dispossessed. And also in this painting, she's mocking American values of sports, plumbing, the telephone, and Mae West with the toilet and the trophy. There's a telephone that winds in and out of all the buildings, and then way on the left is Mae West, Rivera thought Mae West was the most wonderful thing in the world, and Kahlo, I think, is going to burn her up on that billboard. There's a fire under there. Kahlo had a great sense of humor, and we mustn't think she's all pain. She also had a lot of fun in life. And she's painted Trinity Church with a ribbon attaching it to Federal Hall. And Trinity Church, the window has the cross turned into a $sign. And then on the steps of Federal Hall is a graph that says weekly sales in millions. So I think she's sort of connecting Protestantism and capitalism here. And Frida Kahlo, again, was really homesick for Mexico, and she's not in her dress. I think her spirit is in that boat, which is also collaged onto the painting. She really wanted to go back to Mexico. And at the end of 1933, after Rockefeller kicked Rivera out of Rockefeller Center, and he painted some more mural panels after that, but then they did go back to Mexico. He did not want to go back. He felt that the Marxist revolution would take place in an industrialized country, but Kahlo really did, and he was quite angry with her when they did go back. He proceeded to have a love affair with her younger sister, Cristina, which Kahlo found out about, and in 1934, there are no known paintings from Kahlo, and from 1935, there are only 2 paintings. One is a small self-portrait with cropped hair, and this one is a few small nips, which is her response was she couldn't paint her own self. She felt so awful. She separated from Rivera, thought about killing herself, apparently. She told people later that she thought of suicide at this time. And she cut off her hair and stopped wearing Tijuana dresses during this period. A few small nips actually was prompted by a newspaper article that she read about a man who murdered his girlfriend and then was taken before the judge and said, "But I only gave her a few small nips." Kahlo would have found this funny. She had a black sense of humor, but she also said that she had needed to paint this painting because she herself felt, quote, murdered by life. But there is humor in it. The woman is wearing a garter and a shoe, and then these little love doves holding up the title of the painting, A Few Small Nips. There's humor, and there's also terrible pain. And of course, here the blood is bursting out onto the frame, and then, which I didn't know until we unpacked the painting, that she stabbed took a knife and stabbed the frame. So if you look through Kahlo's self-portraits, you can see that they get bloodiest when she felt betrayed by Rivera. 2 years later, we're gonna have to go here. 2 years later, she was able to paint her misery over this Cristina and Rivera situation in memory, which you see on the left. What you see, this is the first painting with an extracted heart, a straightforward symbol of pain and love. I'm just showing it next to a wonderful photograph from the Wolf collection that is hanging in the show, taken by Manuel Alves Bravo. I think it's around 1958, of Frida Kahlo on the roof of her house with the empty dress, because she painted empty dresses quite often. I thought it was a poignant photograph. So Kahlo never paints psychic pain by changing her facial expression, but always through bodily wounds. And her paintings very much, I think, are influenced by Mexican martyrdom scenes, the kinds of things that you see in Mexican churches, very bloody martyrdom scenes. I just wanted to go back for a minute. Oh, I should have talked about this before in relationship to A Few Small Nips. This is a print by Jose Guadalupe Posada, the great turn-of-the-century printmaker. And going back, this is he painted a lot of sort of broadsides that were sold for a few penny in the streets of Mexico, and many of them show men's violence to women. So Kahlo, taking the idea from a newspaper, it's almost as though her painting A Few Small Nips is it like a broadside. In 1937, Rivera organized for Leon Trotsky and his wife Natalia to be given asylum in Mexico, and Frida Kahlo lent Trotsky and Natalia her house in Coyoacan. The Riveras were then living in San Angel, where they'd had 2 houses built for them in the early 30s. Frida Kahlo had a brief love affair with Trotsky, and after she broke up with him, she gave him this painting, which is actually dedicated to Trotsky. It was a very dangerous thing for him to be doing, and I think eventually Rivera did find out about it. But anyway, this painting, I think, is like the wedding portrait you saw earlier, is very much influenced by 19th century folk portraiture of Mexico. There are many folk portraits in the Frida Kahlo Museum. And Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera's favorite was it's not here? Well, let's see. Sorry, it doesn't seem to be here. Their favorite was Jose Maria Estrada. And I think, yeah, that Kahlo and Rivera were both very much influenced by Estrada. In 1938, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo got to know André Breton when he came to Mexico. And he claimed Frida Kahlo, he loved Kahlo's work, and he claimed her for surrealism. She painted in that year What the Water Gave Me, which is the closest she ever came to surrealism. There's her empty dress again, Frida drowned, her parents taken from their wedding portrait that you saw also in My Grandparents, My Parents and I, and then two images that are probably Frida. The two nudes, the dark and the light, her duality is floating on a sponge. They're the same figures that you see in Two Nudes in a Forest, the painting that she did in 1939. I think the painting is a bathtub reverie, really about her past and about death. I don't think that she was a surrealist. Her fantasy is very much based on Mexican popular art and on her own sense of fantasy. She wasn't interested in mystification or being really enigmatic. She's very straightforward, I think. And her paintings are so directly based on her life. Her position on this issue was, I never knew I was a surrealist until André Breton came to Mexico and told me I was. I never painted dreams, I painted my own reality. But surrealism certainly helped Kahlo to follow her own fantasy. It also helped her in her career. Breton recommended that Julian Levy, the surrealist-oriented gallery in New York, give her a show. In 1938, he did. And then he included a whole group of Frida Kahlo's paintings in a much bigger show called Mexique in Paris in 1939. When Kahlo traveled to both of these shows without Rivera, and from the Paris show, this painting was in the Paris show, and it was a painting that she sold to the Louvre, which made her very proud, and also Rivera was very proud of her. From Paris, she wrote to a lover, or perhaps by then a former lover, Nick Mural, the photographer. She said, "There were a lot of people on the day of the opening. Great congratulations for the Chicua," that's her nickname. Among them, a big hug from Juan Miró, great praises for my painting from Kandinsky, congratulations from Picasso and Tanguy, from Breton, and from other big cacas of surrealism. She wrote wonderfully. If she writes in English, she's fabulous, full of swearing and really marvelous. She didn't like the surrealists. She thought they were very lazy and they just sat on their behinds in the cafes. And the only one that she really liked, the only person she really loved, Marcel Duchamp. So she got back to Mexico in 1939, and Diego Rivera asked her for a divorce. And she certainly did not want to divorce Rivera. She loved him totally. And this is a painting that she started during the period that the divorce was coming through. The Two Fridas, 1939. It's in the show. It's the first time it's been shown in the United States, and it's one of two large paintings that she ever did in her life. Frida Kahlo wrote to Nick Mural when she got back to Mexico, "2 weeks ago, we began the divorce. I have no word to tell you how I've been suffering, knowing how much I love Diego. You must understand that this troubles will never end in my life. Now I feel so rotten and lonely that it seems to me that nobody in the world has suffered the way I do. But, of course, it will be different in a few months." And during the divorce, though she was incredibly depressed and became very, very ill, you'll see photographs in the Wolf collection that Nick Mural took of her in traction. She painted some of her most powerful self-portraits. She said, also to Mural, she said that she never wanted to accept money from any man until she died. So she had to paint in order to make a living. But it also seems that misery energized her creative process. About this, the two Fridas, she said to a visitor that the Frida on the right, one wearing a Tijuana dress, is the Frida Kahlo that Diego had loved. And the one on the left, wearing a kind of white dress, Victorian wedding dress, is the one that he no longer loved. And the Tijuana Frida holds a little portrait a little photograph of Diego Rivera as a child with a red frame from which springs a vein that goes through both extracted hearts, again, a symbol of pain and love, and that the Victorian dress, Frida, tries to stay the flow of blood from Diego Rivera, but she's unsuccessful, and the flowers embroidered on the dress, some of them turn into splotches of blood. It's a very, very extraordinarily strong and powerful painting, and it's very interesting. A whole lot of Frida Kahlo documents have just been discovered in the Frida Kahlo Museum and are going to sometime soon be accessible to scholars. There was an exhibition of them, and I found this letter that Kahlo had. It was an exhibition in the Frida Kahlo Museum that she wrote to a critic, Alfonso Manrique, in October 1939 about this painting. And she wrote, "The fact that I painted myself twice, I think, is nothing but the representation of my loneliness. What I mean to say is I resorted to myself. I sought my own help. This is the reason why the two figures are holding hands. There is little more I am able to explain because all the truly lively motifs of this painting are, without doubt, subconscious. I believe the clear object of this painting is the relation between my inner life and Diego." I think that Frida Kahlo is probably one of the loneliest paintings ever painted. In her self-enclosed world, Kahlo holds her own hand. Another painting from the divorce year is Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair. It's from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Here she's taken, Jose Guadalupe Posada made many song illustration prints, and she's turned this self-portrait into the illustration of a popular song. It says up above, "Look, if I loved you, it was for your hair. Now that you are bald, I don't love you anymore." This time that he asked her for and divorced Frida, she cropped her hair once again and stopped wearing Tijuana dresses. She's wearing a suit that's so big it must be Rivera's. And she's cut off her hair, but that hair, just like the blood in the two Fridas, it remains animate, and she seems to not be able to get rid of this slightly creepy hair. And of course the scissors are fairly threatening the way she holds them, the place that she holds them. They remarried after 1 year in San Francisco, where Rivera had gone. One of the reasons, no one knows why they divorced, but he had developed a big infatuation for Paulette Goddard and had gone off to San Francisco with her on an airplane. And he, in San Francisco, is painting the Treasure Island mural in public at Golden Gate Park, and that is a detail of it you see on the right. And on the left, you see Frida Kahlo's first self-portrait after the remarriage, which happened on Rivera's birthday. It's Self-Portrait with Braid from 1941. I think the self-portrait by Frida, you can see that the remarriage, well, I don't know whether this expresses unhappiness in her marriage or unhappiness as many other reasons that she had. She wasn't that happy in 1931, you can tell from letters to LOSer. But anyway, she's naked, and then these leaves, the serrated leaves, look rather threatening against her naked flesh. And that necklace, which is actually a pre-Columbian necklace that she owned, kind of looks like a yoke. It looks as though it's going to choke her. But she has taken the hair that she cut off in the two Fridas and put it on her head as a kind of reaffirmation of femininity. In the mural that Rivera did at the Golden Gate International Fair, Rivera he decided to put Frida Kahlo in it, as you see her there standing with her Tijuana dress. This time she's got the palette. Rivera is just to the right of her, holding hands with Paulette Goddard around the tree of love and life. Rivera, whenever he painted Frida, he always made her into a symbol, and he said about her in his mural, "Frida represents the Mexican artist with a sophisticated European background who had turned to native plastic tradition for inspiration. She personifies the union of the Americas for the South." And Paulette Goddard, he said, she's holding hands with him around the tree of love of life, which he said she stands for, quote, "American girlhood shown in friendly contact with a Mexican man." And then the man was incorrigible and asked why he was painting himself holding hands with Paulette Goddard. He said, "It means closer Pan-Americanism." Actually, he'd rejected Trotsky at this point and had turned to the idea of Pan-American Union to fight fascism. So there was some, that we wasn't being just meaningless in closer Pan-Americanism. Kahlo's paintings, self-portraits after the remarriage, I think show that she continued to want, even though she said he should be free, she continued, and they married on the basis of mutual independence. They weren't supposed to make love anymore, and she was supposed to support herself. Nevertheless, she continued to want to possess Rivera. I think you can see that in Self-Portrait as a Tijuana from 1943, where she's put the portrait of her husband as a kind of obsessive thought, trapped him in the middle of her forehead. And then the following year, in 1944, she painted, on the left is Frida and Diego, 1929 to 1944. It was an anniversary present for Rivera at a time they weren't actually getting along. And I think this little tiny painting shows her desire to possess him had turned into a desire to merge with him. Half the face is Kahlos and half is Rivera's, but the two halves of the head do not line up, so it's very disjunctive, and it's extremely uncomfortable union that only will seem to stay together by this really uncomfortable sort of take off the tree that becomes like a crown of thorns holding them together. And just on the right is a little, it's a pin that Frida wore, to which it's a silver pin that it's about 1.5 inches high, to which she attached a Tlatilco head, just to show that this idea of duality, male, female, is something that she took partly from pre-Columbian art. This was her pin. She gave it to a lover at the end of in 1946. In the 1947, this is another anniversary present for Rivera, a very strange one. It's a drawing in which she's, I think, again, merged her identity with him. That head seems to be half Frida and half Diego. Again, he's got the eye in the middle, the super visibility eye in the middle of his forehead. On it, she wrote, "Deceit Avenue, ruin, house for birds, nest for love, all for nothing, ruin." February 1947. The numbers, by the way, are supposed to represent Rivera's love affairs. In 1949, Rivera asked Frida Kahlo for a divorce again. This time he wanted to marry the beautiful Mexican film star Maria Felix, who you see with Rivera in a newspaper photograph. And the two of them are, right between Rivera and Maria Felix is his big portrait of Maria Felix that he wanted to make the main thing in his big show at Bellas Artes in Mexico City that was about to happen. In the end, she wouldn't lend her painting, and she rejected Rivera. He went back to Frida, and Kahlo was very happy to have him back. But although she scoffed at many of his love affairs, she did not scoff at the one with Maria Felix because she was an intimate friend of Maria Felix. And during this miserable period, she tried to kill herself, and she painted this self-portrait on the right called Diego and I, which is the one portrait in which she almost loses that fierce composure of hers. But he came back to her, and she painted, which is in the show, the love embrace of the universe, the earth, Mexico, Diego, me, and Señor Xolotl. That's the escuincle dog on the universe's brown arm. That's from the later half of 1949. And I think it shows some kind of resolution in their marriage, but it's a kind of desperate view of marital harmony in that she has to be, the couple has to be sustained by all of these love embraces, and they're sort of floating in the sky. The roots are hanging loose. Frida loved painting roots. But what she figured out about, well, she probably knew this already, but she seems to have figured out that the way to hold on to Rivera was to indulge him as if he was a baby. And she wrote, women, I quote, "Women, among them I, would always want to hold him in their arms like a newborn baby. At every moment he is my child born every moment, diary from myself." That's in the diary that she wrote in the last 10 years of her life. So there she has him as a baby, but things are not obviously perfect because her chest is still cracked open and bleeding, and she is still crying. After this, he really couldn't leave her again because her health deteriorated. In the second half of the 40s, she began to have a lot of surgical operations on her spine, and she made this a theme in her work. You saw this one earlier, the broken column. That's from 44, where she had to have this awful series of orthopedic courses that she called a martyrdom and a Calvary. The broken column is Frida, the heroic sufferer, almost showing herself as a Mexican Saint Sebastian, her body cracked open, her own broken spinal column replaced by a broken ionic column. She's crying, but her face does not flinch. And the broken open body is echoed in the vast desert-like Mexican earth with those ravines cut into it. It's her image of Mexico, the place that she loved madly, is oddly sort of this vast, rough, wonderful, but sort of slightly frightening earth, always broken open. Kahlo, in these paintings, does not act. She is acted upon. She is the immobilized victim of things done to her body, and she is the object of her own piercing and very active regard. Yet the paintings, for all their stasis, shake with life because they embody explosive feeling held in check by steely will. Another painting from 1946, also having to do with surgery, is The Little Deer, which she painted just before going to have a spinal fusion in New York, and she gave to the people who recommended the doctor in New York. I think it's, again, she is pierced, and I think it's really a painting that shows her terrible sense of vulnerability. But as Betsy pointed out, one has the feeling of hope that back there is the sea, that there could be some kind of escape from all of this. And then she often has these dead tree chunks, but there is a little live green branch, and that's something that she contrasts quite often in her work, death and life. Just to show the connection with reality, and I mean that she actually did have a pet deer. This is a photograph by Nick Mural from around 1938 of Frida with Granizo, her little deer. Another painting also from the year that she had this spinal surgery is Tree of Hope. That's 1946 again. And she said it was, quote, nothing but the result of the damned operation. That operation didn't do anything really much to help her spine. She continued to get worse and worse. The painting shows, once again, her duality, two Fridas. Frida, the tragic victim here, and Frida, the heroic sufferer. Sort of the one on the right, it's as though Frida is her own holy figure. She is transacting her own salvation. It's a little like an ex voto in that way. And she's holding, the Tijuana Frida is holding a flag that says, Tree of Hope, keep firm, which is a song, it's a line from a song that she totally loved. But as I said, her spine continued to get worse and worse. In 1950 to 51, she was in the hospital for a whole year, having 7 operations on her spine. When she got out of the hospital, she painted self-portrait with the portrait of Dr. Faril, and that is her surgeon that she's painting. And here is a photograph of her with Dr. Faril that's in the Vicente Woolf collection, a wonderful photograph by Giselle Freund. Frida's self-portrait with Faril is very much like an ex voto, with him, the doctor, taking the place of the holy figure. And she's painting it, she's put her heart on her palette to show that she's painting from the heart. She said, thinking about Dr. Faril as the holy image in a retablo, she said, Dr. Faril saved me. He gave me back the joy of life. She wrote this in her diary. But she also said that she didn't know if she would be able to walk again, and that she felt, quote, a desperation that no words can describe. She tried to eradicate that desperation by clinging to her alegría, or her joy, and by painting. But her will and her love of life was nearly crushed when, in 1953, her right leg was amputated because of gangrene. at the knee. And in her diary, she did these two images. On the left is, it says, "Feet, what do I need them for if I have wings to fly?" And on the right, she is a portrait, a drawing of Frida falling off a column, breaking apart, and she wrote, "I am disintegration." At the end of her life, politics, she became a very passionate Stalinist, wanted to help Diego Rivera get back into the Communist Party that he'd been kicked out in 1929. Politics became kind of a religion for Frida Kahlo, and it also became a huge bond with Rivera. This is a painting from her last year, 1954, in the Frida Kahlo Museum. And it's sort of like a retablo. Frida Kahlo is able to cast aside her crutches because Marx in the sky, he's the holy figure, he is enabling her to get rid of her crutches. So if you look at it, comparing it to the earlier work, it's very crudely painted. At this point, she was completely dependent on all kinds of painkillers, Demerol, codeine, and she sort of loses her fine, precise touch with the brush. The last image in her journal is this one of a black angel, and her last words were, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to come back." And I believe that nobody knows for sure, but her death was said to have been from a pulmonary embolism, but I think she probably did kill herself with an overdose. She gave her an anniversary present to Rivera the night before she died. Quite a bit before the actual anniversary. After she died, Rivera gave the Blue House in Coyoacan to Mexico as a memory of his wife, and he said, "Too late now, I realized that the most wonderful part of my life had been my love for Frida." So he gave the house, and there it is, and there's a fairly late photograph of Frida Kahlo taken by Florence Arquin in the Blue House in Coyoacan. A painting that's in the museum is this one, Viva la Vida. It's actually, it was a painting she probably started in around 1952, but it was 8 days before she died that she wrote on that front slice of watermelon the words Viva la Vida. And the painting is kind of a salute to life, but I think with the words she's also acknowledging the imminence of death. In her last terrible months, Kahlo wrote in her journal, "I have achieved a lot. I will be able to walk. I will be able to paint. I love Diego more than I love myself. My will is great. My will remains." And I think that gift, now I'm going to go into the legacy, that gift of strength is a large part of Kahlo's legacy. That's what many of us get from her, is that gift of strength. For many people, Kahlo has become a kind of talisman, a kind of touchstone to be turned to for fortitude. And as a result, in the last 25 years, she has become an international cult figure. Starting in the late 70s, I would say, thanks to feminism and multiculturalism, there have been numerous books and films and theater, operas, everything focusing on the life of Frida Kahlo. And what is called Frida-mania has prompted, as you probably all know, an industry. There are restaurants named after Frida. Her native costumes have inspired the fashion world. And of course, you can buy all kinds of Frida paraphernalia, even in the gift shop here, but very tasteful ones in the gift shop here. Very tasteful. I want them all. They're turned up in shops everywhere. And a few years ago, there was an uproar when the US came out with Frida Kahlo self-portrait, the one from 1933, very simple one with the pre-Columbian necklace in the Gelman collection, as a postage stamp. They said, people who objected said, well, she wasn't American, and that she was a communist, and she shouldn't be on one of our stamps. Kahlo has captured the imaginations of everyone from scholars to movie stars. Madonna, for example, wanted, as you know, to make a film in which she would play Frida, and she told me in an interview, quote, "Frida was a drama queen, and I can identify with that." Salma Hayek, who starred, many of you have seen the film, the marvelous film, starred in the Miramax Kahlo film, I think was equally passionate in her identification with Frida. As a cult figure, Kahlo has taken on kind of magical power. The magic aura of her self-portraits comes from the fact that each was a bid for survival. But Kahlo does not invoke supernatural powers. Rather, she summons forces deep within herself. And I'd like to take a quick look at Kahlo's legacy in terms of the artists that she affected. Her work has been inspirational to women artists, for Chicanos, and for a group of Mexican painters called the Neo-Mexicanistas. Teresa del Conde, I think, labeled them that, who emerged in the 1980s and who followed Kahlo's lead in making art that is emphatically personal. The first artist, okay, I'll go one more, is Nahum Senil. He's a Mexico City artist. And he painted both of these. Actually, he mixes drawing and painting a lot. Most of it's on paper. This on the left is from 1991, Frida in My Heart. On the right is a work called With Thorns. Most of Kahlo's legatees explored their identities through self-portraits, and several used the body, often wounded and broken and in pain, as a way of expressing psychic states. In Mexico, Nahum Senil has depicted himself with and as Frida. In the one on the left, he has an extracted heart. There are a lot of extracted hearts in these Neo-Mexicanistas work. The extracted heart, but instead of it just being a heart, he's actually turned it into a portrait of Kahlo. And then he's borrowed her wall of jungle leaves with which she often closes off space in her self-portraits. And then he's taking off in the right from Frida's self-portraits with Thorns of Necklace, turning himself. He, like Frida, identified his sufferings with Christ, with those of Christ. And for Senil, as for Kahlo, retablos were an important source. And he uses the Christian imagery to kind of dramatize his own suffering. And in his case of his suffering, he said that it had everything to do with the difficulty of being a gay man in conservative Mexican society. This is a couple of works by Rocio Maldonado, a woman who lives just outside of Mexico City. My Heart on the right and Maternity on the left. She is a Kahlo legatee, partly in her Mexicanism. She's full of popular art motifs and, of course, extracted hearts. And she, too, paints certain motifs that recall Kahlo's. For example, she paints lactating breasts, fetuses, and the depiction of various bodily fluids, tears, blood, milk, and semen. I think you can see there's a fetus there. It's a little hard to read in this image. Looking at it on the computer, yeah, there's a fetus, and there's supposed to be an extracted heart to the right of this classical figure and a fetus to the left, and then a kind of thorn-like thing, roses with thorns at the bottom. This is just another Rocio Maldonado. She did various paintings of broken dolls, and this on the right is one of them, and I'm just comparing it to Frida's memory, the sense of dismemberment in a way of expressing the feeling of helplessness. Dulce Maria Núñez, who lives in León, Mexico, did this homage to Frida Kahlo in 1991. She's taken a heroic Frida from a late photograph at the top and then done a sort of remake of Frida Kahlo's My Nurse and I below. Núñez has said that painting autobiographical imagery, although it's hard to see why this is autobiographical, but most of her imagery, she says, was a way of helping her deal with her life, issues of life. And she's especially attracted to Frida Kahlo's Mexicanidad, or as she put it, the rescue of the popular. From her point of view, many of the artists of her generation in Mexico actually refer to Frida. She said, Frida, she was always there. She had to have an impact on us. The next artist, who I don't know if he's in the audience, but he was here last night, is Jose Luis Romo, who lives in Querétaro. And he feels very deeply connected to the retablo-like or ex voto-like function of Kahlo's art. On the left, on the top, it's not left and right, on the top is Self-Portrait and from 1983 and Bitter Nightmares on the bottom from 1985. He had a terrible car accident in 1981, and after that, he began to paint brutally wounded self-portraits that are very close in the function of Frida Kahlo's many paintings having to do with her surgeries, her response to surgery. For Romo, as for Kahlo, painting his predicament was a way of coping with pain. And he, like she, and like many of the neo-Mexicanistas, chose a naive folkloric style in order to affirm his Mexican identity and also to mitigate the impact of his agonizing subject matter. Romo said that Mexican painting in the 1980s was, and I quote, a renaissance of the self, a rediscovery of the body, of the painter's personality, and also of the strength of Mexican art and culture. And then he said, Frida Kahlo was the axis that marked that generation. So many of these artists have really acknowledged the powerful effect of Kahlo. Oop, did I skip one? Let it go. You know, we're missing some, but that's okay. Very strange. There is something missing, but we will move ahead to, in the United States. Oh, I put paper on this and it moves. Wait a minute, going back. And that, let me just go back, okay. Enrique Chagoya, wait, there, okay, I'm not touching anything. Enrique Chagoya, on the left is what he calls Imaginary Portrait of Frida Kahlo from 83 to 91, and on the right is very funny. It's called What Appropriation Has Given Me Fritas and Dieguitos. That's from 92. In the United States, numerous Chicano and Chicana artists have been profoundly moved by Kahlo's example, especially her passion for her Mexican identity, her affiliation with what she called La Raza, and her perseverance against terrible odds. Kahlo's image became a kind of icon in Chicano art. Her face appeared in murals, posters, billboards, and on craft objects. The Mexican-born San Francisco artist Enrique Chagoya put it this way, quote, Frida appealed to many people. She was a good role model for artists. The handicapped adopted her. The gays and lesbians adopted her. Her bisexuality was a big deal. For Chicanos, he said, Kahlo represented something intense, a mixture of drama and liveliness that was important for both men and women. She became synonymous with being Chicano. For Chicanos, there is a search for identity, to be distinctive, not to be in a melting pot. And it certainly is true that Kahlo's vibrant individualism and her defiance of convention kept her out of the melting pot, and it was very much admired by Chicano artists. Although Chagoya's work tends to be political, and is perhaps more closely related to Mexican caricature than to Kahlo, he did do some retablo-like works inspired by Kahlo. And he tends, for example, I think, in these two works, to see Kahlo less as a suffering heroine than as an emblem of Mexican culture to be deployed with biting wit. He said, Kahlo's influence sparked something in the Chicano art scene that made waves all over the country. I would dare to say that she probably influenced every single Chicano artist in the Bay Area. And there are a number of those artists. In the late 1970s, Kahlo became a feminist role model, admired because at the time when Mexican muralism dominated the art scene, she had the courage to make small autobiographical paintings that addressed female experience. Feminists admired her also because she kept on working in spite of pain and in spite of being in the shadow of her more powerful husband. Today, there are a number of women artists in the United States whose work may look nothing like Frida Kahlo's, but for whom she provided inspiration. Okay. There we go. These are two works by Ellen Berman, who lives in Texas. In 1978, Ellen Berman chanced upon the show that started at the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Kahlo show that started at the Museum of Contemporary Art. It traveled to the University of Houston's Blaffer Gallery, and Berman saw it, and this encounter changed her life. She decided to go to art school, and she soon discovered that she wanted to paint, like Kahlo, her own story. She said, "I began to paint self-portraits right away. Kahlo completely gave me the key to open the door." A major part of Berman's story was her struggle to communicate with and about her severely handicapped daughter, who you see in the portrait, self-portrait. That's a self-portrait with her daughter Sara. It's called Sara and I and the Gulf of Mexico. It's from 1984. And here, Berman looks at the viewer with something of Kahlo's challenging directness. She said, "It's a defense painting. I was saying, here we are, take a good look." And like Kahlo in her more painful self-portraits, Berman forces the viewer to confront her and her daughter's situation. Here on the painting on the left, she's giving vent to her rage at the way people stared at Sara, and she's staring back at them in her paintings. When she painted the one on the right, it's called Sara and the Illustrated Insults, it's also 1984. It alludes to the various physical trials that Sara underwent, eye surgery, she had seizures, all kinds of miseries. Berman said she felt when she painted that she was almost copying Kahlo's depiction of herself in duress. After Sara, the daughter, died at age 17, Berman painted a series of ferociously honest self-portraits, plus a number of paintings of dolls in boxes that are somewhat like Frida Kahlo's The Deceased Demas, which is in this show. During this same period of mourning, Berman painted the painting on the right, which is called Split Fig, and I'm comparing it to a painting that we don't have in the show, Frida Kahlo's Tunas, which is on the left. They both seem to make the tablecloth into kind of a wild landscape. And what Berman liked to do, like Frida, was to take bruised and often cut open fruits that are very anthropomorphic and also have a very strong autobiographical reference. Berman said, "I think that almost all women artists would say Kahlo was important to them because of her guts, her determination, and her success." Another woman artist who was deeply affected by Kahlo is Sara Mcenany, a Philadelphia artist. And here on the left is Mcenany's Daydream. On the right is one called Alopecia from 2006. Daydream is from 2001. In Daydream, Mcenany portrays herself lying on a sofa beneath a wall with paintings that she does not own but which she dreams about owning them. And standing out among them, you can see Frida Kahlo's The Broken Column. It's probably the most dramatic of Kahlo's paintings of herself as the heroic sufferer. Mcenany, like other women artists, was impressed by Kahlo's strength. She herself needed such fortitude because in 1988 she was raped, and in 2006 she was operated for breast cancer. And she dealt with both of these difficulties in her paintings. She painted both, not all of her paintings are about misery, so she painted both the good moments and the bad moments in her life. In Alopecia on the right, this was done while she was having chemotherapy, and she shows herself with her hair falling out, and she is drawing a picture of herself with her hair falling out. Other works from this moment depict acupuncture, the shaving of her head, or herself giving herself an injection. An earlier painting by Mcenany is June 15th, 1998, and it records her experience of rape. Here, both the victim and the aggressor seem to dissolve into shadows. It was as if the artist was willing the event not to have existed. Like Kahlo's stoic but agonized self-portraits, these paintings of Mcenany's were a form of exorcism. She said, They helped me to survive. Kahlo kept on painting no matter what. She is so amazing as an artist and as a person in her life. I liked the fact that that's who I have an affinity with. How lucky for me. Mcenany's a great person. I did an interview with her, and she's terrific. Leslie Dill did the two works on the right. She's a Brooklyn artist, and then you're seeing the broken column by Kahlo on the left. The middle work, which I'm comparing to the broken column, the middle work is by Dill. It's called A Thought Went Up My Mind Today. Many of her works have titles or inscriptions from Emily Dickinson. And the other one, this dress that's hanging there is called Homage to Frida Kahlo. It's from '99. So Leslie Dill lives in Brooklyn. She was inspired by Kahlo, like many artists. She was inspired by Kahlo's use of the body as a way of expressing emotion. The bodies that Dill creates are sometimes, like Kahlo's in the broken column, opened up, and sometimes in pain. In the Homage to Frida Kahlo, the one with this dress hanging there, there's a Victorian-style wedding dress made of wire, thread, cloth, gold leaf that seems to allude to the white dress in the two Fridas. But Dill's empty dress hanging several feet above the ground recalls the feeling of helplessness and absence, also in Frida Kahlo's memory, and my dress hangs there. But Frida Kahlo's several paintings, as you have seen, has an empty dress. Dill said, Kahlo's personal surrealism gives artists like me permission. Our culture is so neutral. Kahlo's fierceness is attractive to artists. I see postcards of Frida Kahlo's work on the walls of many artists' studios. And then she went on to say, Kahlo was so open and ahead of her time, putting forth her pain and fertility at the same time with a kind of lustful sorrow. I liked that, lustful sorrow. There's great sexuality in Frida Kahlo's self-portraits. She paved the way for one as a female artist to work with our own sense of isolation and sorrow, hauntedness and poignancy, vulnerability, and in my case, an almost relentless creativity. Now I feel when I look at Kahlo's work, it's worlds upon worlds upon worlds, such a truth. So it's strengthening inside. Again, that gift of strength. The last of the artists, there is the one that we were missing before. They just got a little bit mixed up. Okay, we've got, it is Julio Galan, and it's very mixed up because we have to go back. It's okay, they're backwards. Okay, it doesn't matter. Julio Galan painted the marvelous self-portrait on the bottom. It's called Rome. Okay, yeah, Rome. It's from 1989, and I'm comparing it with Frida Kahlo's The Dream, which is from 1940 in the show. He died in 2006, still very young. He was from Monterey, and he's a marvelous painter. So here most of his work are self-portraits, but they're not clearly self-portraits. He doesn't actually depict his own features, but does himself in a sort of stereotypical way. But he and Frida both had the sense that anything could come alive, including bedspreads. And you can see that his bedspread at the foot of the bed is kind of raised up into this wild thing with a flower on the top. And Kahlo's bedspread, the embroidery on it turns into roots at the bottom of her bed and then leaves around the top. Oh. Yeah, now I'm comparing Julio Galan's self-portrait with Dr. M to a few small nips. I'm looking for the dates. Oh, no, sorry. Because they, okay, just going back. Okay. It's not turning up, but it doesn't matter. Self-portrait with Dr. M, I don't think you need to know the exact dates. It's just, I think he's sort of taken off from the certain freedoms that Frida Kahlo allowed him. He uses the body to depict his own body, often to depict pain. He said he shares with Frida Kahlo a sort of joy and self-mortification. and that he liked to hurt himself. Anyway, here he is biting himself, and the blood, as in a few small nips, runs out onto the frame. He loved Mexican popular art, but he always uses it. His Mexicanism is very much tongue-in-cheek. He spent many years in New York and was part of the Warhol circle. So let's see, next. These are just, oh, here, he painted various, I believe this is kind of like an absent self-portrait, the China Poblana. He loved Mexican costumes, and that is China Poblana on the left. Then, like Frida Kahlo, he identified himself with Christ's sufferings. There you have Galan embracing Christ, and Christ has actually taken his arm down from the cross to comfort Galan. And here is, here is Galan's kind of, it's like a homoerotic birth scene. It's called The Purple Hat, and I'm comparing it to My Birth by Frida. He and other neo-Mexicanistas sort of took from Frida a kind of boldness about sexuality, and a lot of the paintings are highly sexual. Nahum Senil's and Galan's are very, very sexual in their imagery. And this is Yasumasa Morimura, who is a Japanese photographer who, like Galan, has a great sense of humor. What he did, he saw Kahlo's work, fell in love with it, and didn't know quite how he was going to use it in his own work. He, like Galan, is kind of subversive and very much involved with the invention of his own persona and role-playing, which is something that Frida Kahlo did, a lot of role-playing as well. In 2001, he did a whole series of works taking off from Frida Kahlo's self-portraits. He photographed himself over and over again in the guise of Frida. It's called Inner Dialogue with Frida Kahlo. And what he's appropriated her self-portraits to create his own self-portraits. This one, he's obviously taking off from self-portrait with cropped hair. But he's added, you see, Frida's got men's shoes. He's added high heels, fishnet stockings, and lots of very feminine jewelry. And this, I love this one. This is great. This here is taking off from Kahlo's 1940 self-portrait with thorns dedicated to Dr. Ellawesser. But he's taken her little flowered headdress and turned it into, he loves to mix cultures, and it's a very Japanese flowery thing that's on top of his head. And of course, Frida has a nice Mexican shawl, but he's given himself a Louis Vuitton shawl. The man must have had fun doing these things. He, like the Mexicanistas, let's see, that's, okay, that's, I think that's good. Okay, what he did say about his self-portraits is Frida, that he didn't know, he would make himself up and do a whole sort of setup and then do the picture, but he didn't know how to do her joined eyebrows, so he found a fake mustache, and he put it on his forehead, and he said it's really strange. Frida has this emblem that's actually a male emblem in the middle of her forehead. He said he was exploring, he liked to explore the borderline between the male and female. He found this a very ambiguous borderline, so that in all of his self-portraits as Frida, there's this strange mixture of male and female. And then finally, Kiki Smith. When the New York-based sculptor Kiki Smith was preparing her exhibition at this museum at the Walker Art Center in 2006, she told the curator, Siri Engberg, quote, "Frida Kahlo is the beginning of my work, and I am eternally in debt to her." Like Leslie Dill, Smith uses the body as a signal of feeling. In that regard, Kahlo, she says, is, quote, "one of the big platforms I'm standing on." Kahlo's work, she explains, speaks through the body. She said, "Frida Kahlo is a very strong precedent of using the physical to show the spiritual. Her work exists in your consciousness whether you are aware of it or not." Although Kahlo's paintings and Smith's sculptures look nothing alike, there are many parallels in content. Both present the body as helpless, alone, fragmented, and often in pain. When they depict the female nude, she is not seen and idealized by the male gaze, but rather felt and imagined by a woman from within. Both artists depict extracted hearts, dismembered body parts, strangely animate hair, and various bodily fluids. Both have portrayed the fetus dangling from an umbilical cord, and this is a Kiki Smith Untitled nude from 1992. It's made of paper. As Smith put it, Frida interjected a much more whole version of being a person and being a woman. In terms of the body, she interjected the messy part. And here's a last slide of Kiki Smith on the left, another untitled figure. This one is from 1992, and Frida Kahlo's Without Hope from 46 on the right. Smith's untitled nude has deep red lacerations emblazoned on her back. Although Smith wants her work to have what she calls benevolence, and I guess we can understand that, it's help-giving in some ways, she says, quote, "The things I'm deeply attracted to always have a cut in them. They're always somewhat scarred and mangled, and the damage or the scarring is evident. You can see the vulnerability. The wounds on this woman's back bring to mind Kahlo's wounded self-portraits, especially Tree of Hope. But they also recall the gruesomely bloody Mexican sculptures of Christ and martyred saints that you see in so many Mexican churches. And those Mexican images of martyred saints were a huge source both for Frida Kahlo and for Kiki Smith, who spent a lot of time in Mexico. Kiki's wounded, hanging, and a bandage or disintegrating figures tend to look sorrowing or abject. Kahlo's, on the other hand, may look anguished, but they are always stoic. For both Kahlo and Smith, making art was a means of emotional survival. By painting the terrible things that happened to her, Kahlo gained the strength to keep going. Similarly, Kiki Smith said that the way her art mirrors her experience has a positive effect on her personal life. She said, quote, "You still have to have your inner life at stake in the things you make. I'm just trying to save my life in my art and in everything I do." These 11 highly diverse Kahlo legatees were propelled by Frida Kahlo to invent their own pictorial languages. In a sense, they confirm Frida Kahlo's message of courage and fierce individualism by their passionate self-scrutiny and by the way they made what they took from Kahlo their own. As Leslie Dill noted, quote, "You have to build on what you've taken or you give nothing back." What they took and what they give back in their art gives us, I think, an insight into Frida Kahlo's great contribution to art history. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions if any of you want to know anything more about Frida Kahlo, or are there any questions at all? Yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for being here. I read your biography, the biography that you wrote.
Thank you.
In the late 80s, and I was very pleased with it. It was very complete. My question is regarding the broken color. You mentioned that the background was Mexico. What makes you think that that's Mexico? Because I only see a very lonely space in that background.
I've always been, it's so strange because, as I say, she so loved her native country, but she, in all the landscapes, and she's certainly painting her own country. I mean, it's her image of the world and how her body or her psyche exists in that vast, empty world. It's not specifically any part of Mexico, but it's the way she imagined it. I mean, even the sky isn't specifically, like in the two Fridas, it's very much an El Greco sky. And sometimes the sky actually looks, with its great gashes in the sky, it almost looks like the ravines that are broken into the earth. I think it's just the way she imagines the world as a reflection of her own sense of loneliness. But if you look at it's in the show, my parents and me, her Mexican grandparents are over the Mexican earth, and it's already that dry, desert-like earth. There are some plants growing there, but it's very dry, very empty of people. So I've always assumed it was some aspect of Mexico. Yes?
I'm a Kahlos student, and I'm writing a paper about Frida Kahlo still lives. And I would like to ask you, to what extent do you think that her still lives are full of erotic and political messages, and if you think they were intentional, that Frida actually wanted to portray them as that?
There are some that are more clearly hint at sexual things than the ones that are here in the show. And actually, there are some still lives that have political. There's one for the Congreso de la Paz with inscriptions that are political. The ones here are just subtly political in that they have the little Mexican flag stuck into the fruit, which is hardly that political. I don't think the ones here are particularly political, except that in her love for everything native, which is a political statement. Everything, her affiliation with popular art, her passion, she always painted Mexican fruits, and they're specifically Mexican, I think. So that aspect has something to do with her allegiance to the Mexican people. But these are not the most political, the ones that are in this show. And the sexuality, the one that she did, that's in the Frida Kahlo Museum, the round tondo, that one she did for, I think, Camacho's wife, and Camacho's wife sent it back because it was so sexual. The papaya really looked way too much like a womb to her. So, I don't know, maybe some people see it more than others. Yeah, are there any more questions?
I have a question right here.
Where are you?
You're in front row. No, over here. To your...
Oh, you're, okay.
Two questions. First of all, my first question, in the broken column portrait that she did, the nails that she has inside her, or that are in her skin, do those depict possibly the number of operations she had to hold herself together, or are they some kind of symbolism of her affairs or something to such? Do you know?
I think they're to do with pain. I don't know. She didn't have that many operations. I think there's got to be at least 50 nails in that body. But I think they're also about Saint Sebastian. She put nails instead of Saint Sebastian's arrows. But also in the Frida Kahlo Museum, there's one of her plaster corsets that she wore, and she drew on it or painted on it a broken column, and then she stuck yellow thumbtacks into the plaster as signals of pain, I think.
My second question is, with her youth and her parents, etc., and also being involved with Diego, was religion any kind of a major part of her? It's like you do mention that she uses retablos as a part of her paintings and things like that, but what about her religion? Did she practice religion at all, or was it any kind of atheist or anything? Well,
she was certainly, her mother was a very, very strict Catholic, and Kahlo went to church all through her childhood. And she wrote later that she used to laugh at church with her sister, but the fact was that she was definitely Catholic and brought up Catholic and was a believer. And then she said that she left Catholicism as a teenager. Before she met Rivera, she joined the communist youth group. She was introduced to communism and to Diego Rivera by Tina Modotti, the photographer. At that point, she no longer was religious, and actually in her writings, she is emphatic about not being a believer. Although, you know, sometimes it's hard to get rid of belief, and things remain. There's a remainder in there. And all that association with Christ and the crown of thorns, I think there's a lot of religious imagery in Frida Kahlo's work. So she didn't get away from it. It's hard to get away from it in Mexico in any case. Yes?
Hi. You mentioned Frida's Mexicanidad and how she kind of played that up once she was with Diego, and I am wondering if that was really a result of his influence, or if she already had very strong strong identifications with Mexicanidad before him.
her family's house was very much like a European house. They didn't, after she married Rivera, she decorated her house with all kinds of, you know, that yellow painted wood furniture. Everything was Mexican. It looks like a popular art museum almost. They had everything from the market. But no, her parents wouldn't have decorated their house that way. And Frida Kahlo dressed in regular European, normal European style clothing until she met Rivera. There is this photograph that has emerged of, which has her mother's family in it, and a lot of women dressed in Tijuana dresses. And Frida Kahlo circled one of them and mentioned that it was her mother, but actually it's not her mother. Her mother's up to the left of that woman, and in regular clothes, as far as I could see looking at that photograph. I think it was, Frida Kahlo changed her birthday to coincide with the Mexican Revolution, 1910. She pretended she was born then, and I think that she circled this Tijuana woman, pretending that it was her mother, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Any more questions? Yes?
Hello.
Yes. Oh, you know, I don't know, but she painted very slowly. They're only, you know, they're less than 200 paintings. She painted very slowly, and she didn't have a regular, disciplined work life. During the divorce, she worked very, very hard. In certain moments, she worked very, very hard, but there are letters from, say, 1930 where she says she's not working. So I think she painted very slowly. Lucien Bloch, who was a close friend and assistant of Rivera's and very close to Frida in the United States in 1932, said that she started some of those little ones like in the left-hand corner, almost painting it like a mural, and we just move right across. I mean, we don't have any proof of that, but there are photographs of her painting the little paintings, and with a strange easel that like an aluminum pole, and she's sitting there with these tiny little brushes. It must have taken a very long time, and otherwise we'd have more paintings, I think.
Hello.
Yes.
I was really interested in kind of this massive Frida Kahlo, you know, obsession in America and Mexico, and kind of how people or artists who, you know, get a lot of inspiration from her, what they've, you know, gotten out of this, or what that means now. Like the massification of the Frida Kahlo representation. And also, another question, what the airplanes represent in her work. There's two paintings that have airplanes, and I wasn't sure what they meant.
Are you thinking of the one that's in the show, or the self-portrait with the airplane?
Both of them.
The self-portrait with the airplane, people have interpreted it as there's a clock and an airplane in the sky as the idea of time flies. But I'm not sure. That's a possibility. I'm not sure. I think it might have had something to do with Lindbergh, who actually, you know, he was in Mexico at one point, and so I'm not sure what it is really, but it might have to do with modernity and ancient things, but I really don't know precisely why. The first question was about Frida Mania. I couldn't exactly get what the question was.
Just what has been the reaction? Like, has there been any negative reactions to that, or misrepresentation of her, what she stood for?
The sort of popularization of Frida Kahlo. There's definitely been some people really don't like Frida Kahlo partly because she's so popular, and they feel that it isn't warranted. People get angry with other people's success, I think. Also, there was a moment when there was a feminist backlash against Frida because it was thought that she shouldn't be a feminist role model because she had such an abject relationship with Diego Rivera, which I think that her loyalty to him, I think their relationship actually, it's not a sign of weakness. I think that they stayed together is really a sign of strength. But there was definitely a backlash. Yeah, there are a lot of people who don't understand why Frida Kahlo is so beloved, but that's their problem. Yes?
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Did she have any students when she was alive? Or?
Yes, she did. In the 40s, she taught, and there was a very small group of students. At first she went to and taught at La Esmeralda, and then her physical condition was so much weakened that she had her students come to her house. And there's this whole group called the Fridos, and there's various of them that are still alive and who often grant interviews. Apparently she told them that there's no way you can teach painting. But she herself is pretty much self-taught, so maybe that's one of the reasons she thought it can't be taught. Yes?
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I enjoyed it. My question is, do you think, well, Frida did a lot of self-portraits on very personal themes that dealt with her personal life. And I was wondering, do you think that her success and publicity and also the specific themes that she used that other people can relate to makes it difficult now for contemporary artists to present work that is autobiographical and self-portraits in an original way without being linked to Frida?
Can you say that again? Wait.
Do you think Frida's work and success makes it difficult for artists today to make work that is autobiographical and self-portraits, perhaps, that are original and without being linked to Frida?
I don't think so. I mean, I look at all of these artists, and their artwork is nothing like Frida Kahlo's. It's not derivative. It's inspired by Kahlo, but it's not derivative of Frida Kahlo, I don't think. I don't think there are many artists in Mexico right now wanting to make such personal, I mean, I'm not sure, I haven't absolutely followed the contemporary Mexican art scene, but I think there's been even a kind of a reaction against the neo-Mexicanistas. In the United, I think the art world is so open right now that people can do whatever they want. And I don't think it should be a problem making self-portraits.
I have a question. In the piece, I'm back here. No, the other way.
That way.
Here.
Okay.
In the piece where Frida Kahlo is being held by a Teotihuacan mask with her arms, the breast of the Teotihuacan mask is leaking milk. And this is right after the Mexican Civil War. And right after the Muralist manifesto was written by Diego Rivera and the other guys. So what I took from the painting was more a statement from Frida Kahlo saying the real Mexican art or the real Mexicanismo is here. Is here in Mexico. Don't turn around, don't go to Picasso, don't go to Europe. See here and, if I may use the expression, suck the milk from our own roots. I took it more as an statement of what we as Mexicans are, rather than Frida Kahlo seeking protection. Or maybe just taunting Diego with what I need from you, Diego. I need you to protect me.
Right.
And I just wanted to know if you will disagree with that opinion.
No. I've always felt that first of all, she's trying to show her pride in her native roots, that she's suckled from an Indian wet nurse, and that's where she gains her sustenance. But even though, and I don't think that she meant it to be such a lonely, unprotected painting. I mean, remember the quote from her suggests that she thought of it as comforting. I mean, no, there's those Mexican jungle leaves back there and that leaf that is engorged in sympathy with the nurse's breast. I think it's completely about her connection with Mexico. But nevertheless, I feel that it ended up as a painting that, without her being conscious of it, that I don't think she was conscious of it, that ended up as a painting that expressed her own feeling of disconnection. So she had one intention, but something else came out as well. Yes?
Hi, could you respond or tell me your thoughts on recent information that suggests that Frida may not have had polio?
Oh, I don't know anything about it. Well, except that Dr. Eloesser, it's just been a publication, beautiful publication of Frida Kahlo's letters to Eloesser and his to her. And in the back, there's an essay by Eloesser about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, and he said that he thought that she had a congenital scoliosis of the spine.
Right, and I think that's where this is coming from a little bit, but I'm not sure if there's anything more substantial.
Well, she said she had polio. I think, and you can see her withered leg. I don't think a scoliosis of the spine leads you to have a withered leg. So she could have had both. That's okay. Any other? Do we have time for more questions?
Two more questions.
Okay.
Yes, I was kind
Where
of...
are you? Raise your...
yeah,
there you are. Okay.
Okay. I was kind of interested in your quote by Kiki Smith, where you said a lesson that, or something that she really took from the art was that the way in which she used the physical to show the spiritual.
Right.
And I was wondering, without necessarily having to classify Frida as a surrealist, can you at least see why Andre Breton wanted to? I mean, this sort of metaphysical duality and an unconscious, unseen reality represented in those physical symbols.
Right, and actually she did say in 1939 about the two Fridas that it was, the motives all came from her subconscious. She did do that painting just before, she was going to send it to a big surrealism show in Mexico in 1940, and so she kind of used the surrealist connection, I think. There's lots in her work that seem surreal. The dismembered bodies, the juxtaposition of, illogical juxtaposition of things. For example, we don't have that painting here, but in that window in Detroit painting from 1932, there are all kinds of strange objects juxtaposed that seem kind of irrational. But I just feel that her work is so concrete and so close to her life, and so, in a way, very straightforward. It's not uncomplicated. It's many-layered, but it's also straightforward at the same time. That I just don't see her as a surrealist. But other people can see her other ways. Yes, we have one
more question?
Yes.
Hi. Thanks for being here. A quick question. It's been a while since I read your book, the Frida Kahlo, and I hope you have time to sign some after.
Sure.
Is it in your book where you write about her Munchausen complex?
It was in art form. I may have mentioned it in the book as well, but I did a piece in art form many years ago as a possibility that she had more operations than she needed to have, and that she did it as a way of getting attention and holding on to Diego Rivera.
Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. It was the first time I had heard of that kind of a complex. But
one of her doctors said she did not need all of those operations. And actually in these letters from Dr. Ellerwesser, there's one of them writing to Frida saying, don't let all those doctors get at you. They're just, practically experimenting on you. And he just said, eat better, get some sleep, stop drinking, things like that. The usual helpful remarks. Is that it for questions? Okay, well, thank you very, very much.